I'd like to call to order the June 5th, 2015 South Coast Air Quality Management District Governing Board meeting. And I would like to ask Dr. Liu to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All rise. Face the flag. Ready. Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Do I have any opening comments by any of my colleagues?
Mr. Chair, where'd Ruth Ann go? Ruth Ann? Ruth Ann was just appointed to the Riverside County Planning Commission. I thought she'd like us to. I'm not sure where. No, yeah. Congratulations. My son's assistant. Yeah, Ruth Ann, been around here for a while.
Dr. Wallerstein, do you have any comments?
Yes, Dr. Berg. Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to note for the board and the public that this coming week on June 10th and 11th, we will be having our 2016 Air Quality Management Plan Control Strategy Symposium. So it's a wonderful opportunity to discuss control options for the upcoming major revision to the Clean Air Plan and for members of the public to recommend strategies to the agencies for consideration. And we will be joined at this event by our partners in the plan, the California Air Resources Board and the Southern California Association of Governments. And there's a flyer at the dais for the board members. Thank you.
I will take the consent calendar. Items 1 through, we have pulling item number 4. Any other items that would like to be pulled by any board members?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I need to recuse myself from items involving contracts with those who have made charitable donations to my employer, the Coalition for Clean Air. I am recusing myself from item number 3 because Transportation Power Incorporated and Port of Long Beach are potential sources of income which are materially affected by this item. And I'm recusing myself from item number 4 because Southern California Gas Company is a potential source of income which is materially affected by this item. I am recusing myself from agenda item number 9 because Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transportation Authority is a potential source of income which is materially affected by this item. Thank you.
That being heard, are there any other, hearing none, may I get a motion on all those items?
Second.
Yeah, is there any opposition? I'm going to wait till Kurt gets there. These guys.
If I may, Mr. Chair, yes. Attorney just told me I just have to disclose. For agenda item number 9, I have financial interest. I have no financial interest, but I'm required to identify for the record that I'm a member of the Board of Directors for the Orange County Transportation Authority, which is involved with this item.
Thank you very much. So is there any opposition to approval of those items? Hearing none, those items are approved. We will go to item number 4. We have some testimony on item number 4. We'll start with Lou Calanchi. Oh. And Michelle Bienvenides. Aha. And I believe that you're Jackie Rodriguez.
Yes.
Okay. All three of you at the same microphone at the same time. That's
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for having us here. And we're here on item 4. I represent Legacy LA. I'm the executive director, and we're located in the Ramona Gardens community, which is a kind of a bowl surrounded by pollution. We're right next to the freeway, factories, and rail yard. Our youth, which I'm going to let them speak, have been working on environmental justice and have been working closely with the AQMD staff, and we're here in support of this item. And I'm actually going to let them speak. They are our youth leaders, have been working on this project. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Jacqueline Rodriguez.
And I'm Michelle Benavides.
We both reside in Ramona Gardens, and we have both completed our first year of college. Unfortunately, our story is not representative of that of most youth in our community.
Ramona Gardens is an unrepresentative community in Boyle Heights. All of our residents are low income and suffer from huge dropout rates and high rates of respiratory issues. Most, if not all, residents know someone who did not complete high school and are victims of respiratory issues such as bronchitis and asthma and cancer.
Murchison Elementary is Ramona Gardens Public Elementary School. It's a 5-minute walk from Tony's Auto Wrecking, Accurate Plating Factory, ABC Caskets Factory, and Indiana Street, which is often having a large congestion of semi-trucks coming in and out of Ramona Gardens. With an extra 2-minute walk, you can reach the Ramona Gardens Recreation Center, which is right along the San Bernardino Freeway and the train tracks. This is nowhere near a safe environment for the children of Ramona Gardens.
Our research project was goal-oriented. We wanted to allow the children a right to clean air and breathable air, just like any children in higher income communities are essential to. We met with Susan Nakuma. We expressed our very ambitious plan to implement air filters in the space children are most frequently at, which is our home, the recreation center, and school. Our third partner wasn't able to be here, but she shared a very important personal experience of her missing school several times because she suffers from asthma, so it affects her school, with her attending school very often. My little sister also has asthma, and I see her suffering from her academics because she has to miss school a lot because she has to go to the doctors.
We would have loved to attend a school that cared so much about our education that they provided us with breathable air. However, our time has passed. But if future generations of Ramona Gardens no longer have to endure the same quantities of toxic air, I'd say that's already a win. Our hope is that by having breathable air, academic performance would increase and result in long-term skills that would ensure higher rates of high school graduation. One small change might just be the key to greater rates of success. At this time, we would respectfully request for the approval of this item. Thank you for your time.
The brown suit and the kind of yellowy striped tie. His dad and I used to go down to the Ramona Gardens together long before you were born. You know, it's really wonderful to hear you come and testify today. It warms my heart, truly.
Thank you.
Is Ramona Gardens an incorporated city, or
No.
was it a part of, is it in the county?
The housing projects in
It's a
Boyle Heights.
housing project.
Is it in the city of Los Angeles or the county?
East LA.
Yes, it's in the city of East LA. It's actually in Boyle Heights, so it's a community in the city of Los Angeles.
Oh, so, okay, it's not, the only question, I think I've been there at a meeting, and I wondered who had the bright idea of putting a park there next to the railroad thing. I could never figure that out, but had you ever approached the city to do some mitigation like you're asking for us?
We're slowly working on more of our projects.
And go to the planning commission and ask them, what were you thinking when you put this park here? You did a great job.
Thank you very much.
And we also have our park right next to the freeway too.
Jeez, getting on both sides, huh?
Right.
Jeez.
Yeah, I get a motion on 4.
Move approval?
Second?
Any opposition? Approves item number 4.
Mr. Chair, is
Thank you
that
very much.
part of Councilmember Jose Huizar's district? Or is it unincorporated? I was just curious. Is that part of the city of LA?
Yes.
Huizar's district? Is it Councilmember Huizar?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Just curious.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
I didn't pull it because I want to take time, but can I make a comment about item number 14?
sure.
And I want to thank the board for back years ago, and that talks about the lead agency projects and environmental documents. And I always look at it every week for the first part, which this board had vision to look at, and those are the goods movement. It lists all the, but there's one I just wanted to highlight that it just jumped out at me. As I look at this every week, I look at the goods, there's usually 5 to 10 for goods movement. It talks about a lot of warehouse projects out by San Bernardino, Riverside, Ontario. And usually most of them are 500,000, 1 million square feet. A lot of projects. 9 out of 10 are in that area, a couple. But there was one on this agenda, it just, let me tell you, it jumped out because I wanted to notify the supervisor. On the first page of Exhibit A, Attachment A, Incoming CEQA, the bottom one, it's called the World Logistics Center, and I'll just read it, it's very short. The proposed project consists of a new 2,610 acre specific plan and vision to accommodate up to 40.6 million square feet of high cube industrial warehouse distribution development and related uses on nearly 4,000 acres. City of Moreno Valley. This, I look at this, and thank you, Chair, when you were on the board to put this on there, because I look at this, and every week I see everything's going out east, west. And then I saw that this is it's massive.
Oh.
So just what you're talking, the studies we're doing on warehousing, just like a whole area, is just incredible. So thanks, I wanted to bring it to your attention.
All right. We did have a speaker slip on item 21 and 22. Dr. Williams? We'll let you do 21, 22, 27, and we'll hold the rest of your speaker slips until the other items. You can do 21, 22, and 27.
And 27. Okay, 21, 22, make it short and sweet. Sorry. SR 710 is under review by your staff. Is it a mobile source or is it a stationary source? Under what rules and regulations will it be reviewed? We don't know. And the EIR did not indicate whether it's going to be considered as a mobile source or a stationary source. So we'd like to have that included in the comments for the EIR. 27, don't blame the drought for everything. PM 2.5, is it that sensitive to relative humidity or rainfall? If it is, then it seems like we have a problem coming up. Greenhouse gases, global warming, climate change. You can take your choice. If the PM 2.5 changes in relationship to relative humidity, then we got a problem of applying it to San Fernando Valley or the East Basin of the San Gabriel Valley versus Santa Monica. So why blame the relative humidity and rainfall? Is there enough information within the staff reports to substantiate that it's only PM 2.5 that's changing in relationship to the relative humidity, or is it all of them? We don't know. And from the documents, I'd highly recommend, might say, having a review as to the relationship, correlations between the air pollutants and the relative humidity, and then you're going to have perhaps a sub-basin PM 2.5 requirement, because west side of San Fernando Valley is very different from Palo Verde. So we have an issue with that. So we'd like to have those clarified in the reports and or modifications of the proposals. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask staff about the 710 freeway
Surely.
issue? This is a question, my understanding is that, there's planned to be a tunnel and exhaust vents, and I don't know whether we would have regulatory authority of the exhaust coming out of the exhaust vents, or if it's just all part of transportation conformity and mobile source. Barbara, a question for Barbara, I believe.
Yes, Dr. Liu, when staff was reviewing this project, they did ask us to look into the issue. The answer is not completely clear because there is a United States Court of Appeals case in the eastern portion of the United States which said that a tunnel vent was actually an indirect source and therefore not subject to, it was EPA permitting requirement at that point. But I'm not convinced that that case is well reasoned. There is a Ninth Circuit case arising out of California which held that a district could regulate as a stationary source a facility which was conducting testing of jet engine cells because even though the jet engine cell was a mobile source, it was being tested and conducted inside a stationary source, and the district could regulate it. So there are two lines of cases that way, so it's not as easy to come to a conclusion as one might hope, but we need to look into this a little bit further.
Thank you.
Item 28.
Is there a motion on the board count?
I thought, okay, I'll take a motion on 27.
So moved.
Any opposition? Hearing none, that is approved. Item 28.
I'm Director of Strategic Initiatives. I'm here today to present to you proposed amended rules 1401, 1401.1, 1402, and 212 for your consideration. So in March, staff had presented a work plan to implement the revised OEHA guidance, which was approved by OEHA on March 6th. Which incorporated a series of technical support documents and information in regards to the susceptibility of infants and children to air toxics, and also including information on exposure and updated breathing rates. Staff is here today to discuss proposed amendments that would incorporate the revised guidelines. There's the two rules, 1401 and 1401.1, which address permitting. Rule 212, which is notifications for permits, and Rule 1402, which is for AB 2588, which implements our AB 2588 program. So we wanted to just highlight this, the progress that we've made in regards to reducing air toxics. And over the past 25 years, we have made significant strides in reducing air toxics. And as we look at our program, our regulatory program, which began in 1989, our governing board has approved 14 source-specific rules on air toxics and the 3 umbrella rules, 1401, 1401.1, and 1402. In addition to supplement our regulatory program for air toxics, we have source-specific rules for criteria pollutants that also have elements to reduce air toxics. Rule 1401 is the gatekeeper to ensure that all permits that we issue meet specific risk requirements. Under Rule 1401, permits that are issued have to meet health risk, cancer risk of 1 in a million. If they have toxic best available control technologies, they're allowed up to 10 in a million. Since 1990, when this program was implemented, we've approved permits, over 120,000 permits that have been issued under Rule 1401. Our AB 2588 program, which is implemented under Rule 1402, there are 400 which we refer to as core facilities. We review these facilities and group them into 4 groups and prioritize these facilities. And for the highest priority facilities, they're asked to prepare a health risk assessment. And of the 400 facilities, we have 308 facilities that have submitted and we have approved health risk assessments. We've had great success with the AB 2588 program, health risks for the AB 2588 facilities with approved HRAs. 95% of these facilities have health risks that are below 10 in a million. Also, the trends, as we look at the trends and the reductions in air toxics, that there's been substantial reductions since 1990. 75 to 86% when we look at the different monitoring stations, when we look at different industry categories, one example being perchloroethylene for dry cleaners, the reduction is even greater. But we're not done, and we know we're not done. So when we look at air toxics, and we look at air toxics relative to the other air basins, South Coast still ranks the highest with an overall average cancer risk of 400 in a million, and this is backing out diesel particulate. This is with the revised OEHA guidance, so we know that there's still more work to do. To further emphasize this point, MATES 4, with the revised OEHA guidance, this does include diesel particulate, shows the concentration and the elevated health risks throughout the air basin. And we have to be reminded that air toxics is a localized issue, and that proximity matters, and that although the health risk tends to drop off about 90% at 1,000 or 1,500 feet, there are many residents, schools that are still located close to toxic sources, and that cumulative effect. So proximity matters when we talk about health risks. And lastly, I just wanted to emphasize, as we discussed at the board retreat, as we learn more information and we gather more information in regards to air toxics, is that we look at this ambient data and we're finding that when we look at toxic metal particulates, that it's not just the point sources, that the fugitive emissions, that contribution could be quite substantial. So the evolution, there's been an evolution of the air toxics in the policy development through the years. In 1983, the Tanner Bill, AB 1807, helped for us to identify the key toxic air contaminants that are used, the potency of those, and developed a series of risk reduction measures that the state has the air toxics control measures. In 1987, the enactment of AB 2588, the Hotspots program, which developed the first statewide toxics inventory, required facilities to do health risk assessments, risk reduction plans. We started our air toxics program in 1989. OEHA developed the risk guidelines in 1993. In 1999, SB 25 with the Children's Health Protection Act, which started a series of toxic support documents looking at the health effects of children and infants and their susceptibility to air toxics, which is embodied in the 2015 OEHA revised guidelines. So the OEHA revised guidelines represent a major milestone in that the health estimates will account for the sensitivity of infants and children. And the importance of this is emphasized because children are not small adults in that they spend more time outdoors, they breathe faster and have higher breathing rates, their bodies are smaller, and their organs and their brains are still developing. So the general approach that staff is taking and has taken in the past is to incorporate the OEHA guidance into our risk guidance, which is referenced in our toxic rules. And so for permitting for Rule 1401 and 1401.1, we have permitting guidelines, and for AB 2588, we have specific guidance that for the AB 2588 program. So the specific amendments to 1401, 1401.1, and 14 and 212 will incorporate these guidelines. This will be forward-looking. We're not saying that we're going to go retroactively to look at the impacts of the revised guidelines, but 30 days for permits that are deemed complete, 30 days after rule adoption, we would then start implementing and using the revised guidelines. So staff did look at what the potential impacts are, looking at the past 5 years worth of permit data to forecast what potentially could be the effect of the revised guidelines, and found that about 28 new permits per year could require additional toxic best available controls, which represents about 0.5% of the total permits that would be issued on an annual basis. We did also find that there could be more notifications, primarily for diesel backup engines that are located close to residents or sensitive receptors. And then we also have a provision that we're going to hold for spray booths and gas stations to allow them to use existing procedures for calculating health risk to give staff additional time to work with these industries. Spray booths, we permit about almost 300 spray booths a year. We found that the spray booths, that they could require additional controls. This particular industry generally is characterized as small businesses, auto body shops, small furniture manufacturer facilities. And so we want additional time to work with this industry because we believe that there are cost-effective approaches before they would possibly need to put on expensive pollution controls. And then for retail gas stations, staff is working with the California Air Resources Board to understand the most recent updates to emission factors, and staff is committed to come back as quickly as practicable with a rule or procedures for both of these source categories. So in regards to proposed amended Rule 1402, which implements our AB 2588 program, that program is implemented in the 4 groupings. We would still maintain those 4 groupings and continue to implement as what we refer to as a quadrennial review process. Staff did look at the impacts associated with Rule 1402 and 2588 based on previously approved health risk assessments. Some of these health risk assessments can be older because the facility hasn't had any changes or decreases in their emissions, so there was no need for us to ask for an update to the HRA. But based on those previously approved HRAs, staff estimated the potential number of facilities that could have to do additional preparation, notification, or risk reduction. We think these numbers will probably go down as we implement the program, as many of these facilities probably have made risk reductions and the previous HRA did not capture that. So there's 2 key issues that I'd like to highlight. The first issue is in regards to a comment that we have received from some industry representatives in requesting the opportunity to reduce risks earlier and in addition to Rule 1402. Rule 1402 has a threshold that if a facility is over 25 in a million, that they need to do risk reduction. These facilities are concerned that they're facilities that are currently under 10 in a million with the previous guidelines and under the revised guidelines. They could be over 10 in a million. They're willing to make reductions between that band of 10 and 25 in lieu of alternative public notification. So we have in our resolution a commitment for staff to continue to work with stakeholders to look at incentives for early reduction beyond those required under Rule 1402, to assess current public notification procedures, and also to look at alternatives for these facilities. And we're committed to come back to the stationary source no later than September 2015. The second issue is in regards to the health risk thresholds, and some industry representatives have commented in regards to Rule 1401 and 1402 that the thresholds should be increased. And so staff's response is that we've had these risk thresholds for decades, and that when we look at the impacts associated with implementing the revised guidelines, that we are seeing a small percentage of facilities that would be affected under Rule 1401 and about 22 facilities under Rule 1402. So staff's recommendation is that we hold the line on these acceptable risk thresholds. So I'd like to recommend that we approve the attached resolution, certify the environmental assessment, approve the amended rules 1401, 1401.1, 1402, and 212. We have the supplemental documents for the guidance for permitting and for AB 2588 and the prioritization procedures that are receive and file. Thank you.
Would we have some testimony? Would Mr. Lamar come to one microphone? And Mr. David Pettit come to the other microphone? Before we take testimony, would you like to speak, Supervisor?
I just had a question, and it's about the notifications that the companies have to do. How long do they have from when these new rules kick in before they have to do the notifications? Is there anything different about the notifications than they were required to do in the past?
The notifications would be based on for permitting, would be based on as they go through the permitting, and then if they're over 10 in a million facility wide, then they would have to do the public notification, and that would go kind of as they go. And go ahead.
So it's not that if we pass this today, they have to put letters in the mail tomorrow. It's the next time they renew their permits.
That's correct.
And then how long from the permit process do they have to mail to be compliant?
This is Mohsen Azemi. Supervisor, the permitting requires a public notice to be released and 30-day comment period before we issue the final permit to construct. So once the staff completes the evaluation, if the facility is subject to the notice based on the risk level or all the other reasons for public notifications is being close to a school, they would have to send that out with a 30-day comment period, and then we can issue the final permit.
Super, thank you.
Hi, good morning, Dr. Burke, members of the governing board. I'm Bill Lamar. I'm the executive director of the California Small Business Alliance. I came here today to express my appreciation to the staff for the conscientious way in which they engaged the business community over the last 3 months in an effort to address and resolve the many questions and concerns we had about the impact that the OHIA's new guidelines will have on businesses of all size, but especially small business. We're particularly appreciative of the direction given by you board members to the staff at your March meeting in Long Beach. To be sure, staff made a conscientious effort to address our concerns. I think without your leadership, I'm not sure that we would be here today supporting the process used in developing the rules in this particular agenda item. As for small business, we look forward to continuing this collaborative process with the staff in developing acceptable risk communication documentation for public notification purposes, incentives for businesses who wish to take early and additional risk reduction measures, and a few other outstanding elements contained in this package of rules. Thank you for allowing me to comment and your support of small business.
While Mr. Pettit is speaking, could I have David Rohrbach
Mr. Chairman,
to the vacant microphone?
May I just,
I'm sorry.
May I just take a moment to just let this soak in and do the right thing? Thank you, Dr. Wallerstein and staff. And it's fantastic to hear the business community come up, say they'd express concerns, staff listened, board weighed in, and here he is thanking us. We've seen the opposite, and it's just really great to see. So thank you. I did not want to let that moment pass without personally recognizing just appreciation. It's appropriate, and it's warranted. It's fantastic to hear. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Dr. Burke and board members. Although I frequently find myself in disagreement with Mr. Lamar on issues, this morning I'm in total agreement with him. I think the staff proposal is a very careful and responsible way to deal with what OEHA has done, and we at NRDC support staff's proposal. In terms of the notifications, I understand that it can be a tough issue. You don't want the neighbors of some facility to freak out and think that, oh my, now I'm going to get really sick, whereas yesterday I thought everything was really good. I think that is a communications issue that can be worked out with careful drafting and wordsmithing, and I'd be glad to work with staff and with Mr. Lamar's folks and the like to make sure that the communications take care of the fact that the emissions have not increased. What has increased is a technical way of looking at the health risk, and as I mentioned, people should not freak out because of this. Thank you.
And may we please have Mr. Quinn come to the vacant microphone as David, you're testifying.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and governing board members. I'm David Rothbart. I'm representing the Southern California Alliance of Publicly Owned Treatment Works. We want to thank staff for working with us regarding proposed amended Rule 1402 and discussing a potential risk reduction program. As operators of publicly owned facilities, we strive to be good neighbors and have reduced our emissions. However, the new health risk calculation methodology will not reflect these good faith efforts. Instead, overnight, these facilities will appear to have increased toxic emissions. We believe that Establishing a voluntary risk reduction program can provide an incentive for early and additional reductions beyond what is required under Rule 1402 without undermining our relationship with our neighbors. We look forward to working with staff to develop a risk reduction program that provides a win-win scenario for both our facilities and our neighbors. Thank you for your consideration.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Bill Quinn. I'm with SEEB, the California Council for Environmental and Economic Balance. This morning, I want to emphasize that the changes made by OEA are quite significant. The new health risk assessment protocols will have a large impact on many facilities, particularly those that will newly be covered by the AB 2588 program. OEA's changes mean that risk estimates will be higher despite no actual emission increases or exposures. In fact, many sources, emissions may have actually gone down. This change to risk assessment is complicated and hard to explain to both sources and communities, which is why we've stressed the importance of clear and consistent risk communication. We believe your staff is doing an excellent job with this aspect of the rural development. Finally, SEEB is very supportive of the resolution language contained in your packet that directs staff to continue working with stakeholders to incentivize early and additional risk reductions beyond those required under 1402. Work has already begun in this effort, and we see results. We see it resulting in some very positive benefits. So we thank staff. We thank all of you for your attention.
Mr. Curtis Coleman and Mr. Jim Stewart come to the vacant microphones. Mr. Coleman, you're first up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kurt Coleman here today on behalf of the Southern California Air Quality Alliance. In the interest of time, I will just, I have two issues, but I will support what Mr. Quinn just said. And we look forward to working with staff to have these new rules implemented with the new guidelines. I must admit I'm a little confused. Ms. Nakamura in her presentation indicated that they believe that the new HRAs, health risk assessments that would be done using the new guidelines would reflect any emission reductions that have been made since the earlier risk assessments had been done, and yet I'm aware of at least one and possibly two instances where facilities have been told to do a new health risk assessment, but also told not to use their current emissions based on district-approved source tests, which would show a lower risk, and been told they have to use older emission data that would result in a higher health risk. And we just think that's patently unfair, that if you're going with the new health risk guidelines, you should use the most current emission data so you get the most accurate result, and not use older data that would show a higher risk that could be alarming. So if we could get that clarified, that would be very, very helpful. But as I said, we're looking forward to working with the staff through implementing these new guidelines.
Why don't we try and do that? Dr. Wallerstein?
I think what I'd like to do in this case, with the board's permission, is I'll meet with Mr. Coleman and go over these specific two instances, and then we'll provide a report back to the Stationary Source Committee.
Is that satisfactory?
It sounds like the best I'm going to get. Thank you.
Well, but here's what I don't understand. You know whether they were told to use old data or new data. That's an easy.
The question goes beyond that as to all the details of why and how it relates to the rule requirements and 2588 requirements. The staff can answer in more detail, but for me to advise the board, I'd like a chance to sit down with Mr. Coleman and go through the numbers.
Would you like this to continue this item?
Preferably not.
Yeah.
Go ahead and answer.
Well, I'm a little confused here.
So under the AB 2588 program, there's these quadrennial emissions reports. And in general, whatever they report in that quadrennial report is what goes into their health risk assessment. There are some cases where there's been some historical emissions, and under that program there is a right of the public to know what they've historically been exposed to, not just perhaps that year, because what we're talking about is a long-term exposure. So we want to make sure that the health risk assessments give the public a full picture of their exposure. Now, I don't know, I'd have to look into the specifics of this specific case or the two cases that Mr. Coleman is mentioning, but in general...
Do you have some specifics, Mr. Coleman?
Well, Cometco is the one I'm fully aware of because they're a member of my organization.
The name this rings familiar in this building?
This is the other battery recycling plant other than Exide that has been an issue for the surrounding community. So go ahead and answer.
Hi, Ian McMillan. I'm a Planning and Rules Manager over the AB 2588 program. In the case of Cometco, the issue is that there's an old source test from 2013, which is a high value of emissions, and then since then, a lot of the more recent tests have shown lower emissions. There's additional data in the case of Cometco where there's actual monitors on site that are also recording what's happening through time, and we're taking that monitoring data, including the current monitoring data, into account before we approve that HRA.
So the monitors are picking up pollutants that wouldn't come from other sources, and the monitors are showing higher levels than one would predict from the source test. So we know that in the case of some of these source tests, there can be either the operating conditions at the time of the source test might not match what are the typical operating conditions or the ones that are leading to the high monitoring results, and therefore you would be underestimating.
Did we at any time tell any other source that we were going to use not the most current data?
Typically what happens with an AB 2588 HRA request, we have data that comes into staff and we request an HRA based on the data that's available at that time. There are time constraints in the Health and Safety Code to prepare the HRA and then to review it. And oftentimes the emissions will change since we requested it.
I was just asking for yes or no. Can you give me that?
There are cases in the process. We ask for an HRA based on a specific year of emission data. And as the development of the HRA progresses, an additional year of emissions data could come in and be available, but we generally hold the facilities to that original year. But there are some special cases. And we allow the facility, if the emissions have...
of other, and I don't want to take all my colleagues' time.
Okay, so Dr. Burke and members of the board, the HRA, if the resulting number is a number above the threshold, then triggers a risk reduction plan. But in this case, when they go to do the risk reduction plan, we take into account the source test information to allow them to adjust the risk reduction plan. The staff believes that it's important in a facility such as this, if we have information that shows that there is higher levels, that we be careful that we're not significantly underestimating the impact to the community, that they go through the rest of the process.
I'd be happy to jump in here, Mr. Chairman. I think the bigger principle here is that we all want to make sure we're using the most accurate emissions inventory as possible, right, under any circumstance. So I don't know if we have a set process by which a company can come in and say, we have more recent data that we think is more accurate and we'd like you to use that. Or in the other case where we've done monitoring and we've shown that the actual emissions are higher than we had estimated and we need to adjust the numbers up, I think we all will agree that we just want it to be as accurate as possible. So I think maybe staff can come back to Stationary Source Committee with a report on how best to handle this situation so that we're using the best data in the most accurate fashion.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with Dr. Liu, and I think we can work with staff, and hopefully when we come back to the Stationary Source Committee, we'll all be in agreement with how we're going to move forward on this. So I appreciate the board's time. I'm not here to hold up the approval, the adoption of this rule, I had that specific issue, and I think the board direction and staff's offer, we'll see what we can work out.
Okay.
Thank you.
You know, but when you bring up a point, you know, that the point has an effect. So, you know, you say that you weren't opposed to holding up the rule, but if the client that you represent has a real legitimate beef, that's what happens. Unless we can approve this rule with some kind of a guarantee that, you know, you sit down with them and
Well, Dr. Burke, obviously I'm going to sit down with him. This is something that apparently was discussed in some of the meetings with staff, but Mr. Coleman didn't reach out to me as he has done on some occasions.
Right. I just learned of this
in the
this
past,
last Monday.
And there's no written correspondence on this, and I think we'll come back to the board, and whatever adjustments are appropriate, we'll certainly recommend those.
Okay, Dr. Stewart, I'm sorry to keep you waiting.
No problem. Glad you worked on that issue. The Sierra Club is, of course, supportive of this. This is a very, very important rule. We're finally using health risk assessments that include children's health. And this is our job, to protect children's health as long as everybody else's. And so we're really pleased that the staff is going forward with incorporating this and into the health risk assessment process, and that we look forward to your approval of this resolution. Thank you.
Adrian Martinez.
Mr. Chairman, while the speaker's coming up, just a comment on sure. the earlier discussion. I don't have any familiarity with the actual format, but it would seem to me that if there's a relevance to having historical data, that at least it be presented as historical data as opposed to current data, so that people would know. There's a benefit for health studies to know that something used to be. Sure. If you've lived there 20 years, you may want to know if I was exposed to something 5 years ago. But you know, perhaps that would be helpful to just delineate what was and what is.
Supervisor, you're spot on, and actually we allow that to be presented in the HRA.
Well, that would seem to mitigate some of the concern, which would be that historical data versus current is clearly shown as that. This is what used to be, this is what is. Somehow seems the speaker is still concerned that that may not be the case.
Well, we'll meet and we'll let the stationary source committee know what the results are.
What troubles me is that it seems like it's selective.
It's not selective, Dr. Burke, in the context of what other information exists that the staff's aware of in seeking to have an accurate full picture painted for each of these facilities.
Mr. Martinez, I'm sorry to keep you waiting, but you know we always love to hear from you.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
may I ask one question? Because
sure.
Is this data presented regardless to whether or not it's more or less than what the current itself is, historically?
If there is if you will, a desire to use one set of data, the staff thinks that there's another set of data that needs to be presented, then the facility has the option of presenting both.
So it seems to me that we would be talking about maybe today we're getting more results, and yesterday we were getting less, that the argument itself could be that that more that we're getting really now is fugitive, you know, toxic emissions rather than the ambient that we're dealing with currently. So that would be to their advantage. My question obviously is, can they present the stuff that would be to their advantage as well as the stuff that would be to their disadvantage on the historical side?
More data is generally better.
We'll try it one more time.
Good morning, Dr. Burke and members of the board. My name is Adrian Martinez, and I'm here on behalf of Earth Justice to support the staff proposal today. There are a couple issues I just want to talk about. I think it's important, and I think staff has done a good job of reflecting the best science on risk and proposing to update rules appropriately. There's one issue on the gas stations and spray booths. I think it's okay to spend some more time to address these issues. We'd hope that there'd be some guidance on when they should come back to the board, because there's a really robust set of regulations that are coming before the board over the next year. So just making sure there's some certainty on getting this issue resolved. And then finally, I just want to reiterate that the staff and the AQMD in general has dealt with communicating very complex issues for decades. I don't think there's any rule, regulation, or anything that the district does that isn't complicated. And so I think staff and others have a lot of expertise in how to communicate the complexity related to different risk assessments. And then the final issue I want to raise is the AQMD is going to be a leader on this issue. There are going to be other agencies grappling with this, like the ports of LA and Long Beach. Their risk assessments are going to be impacted. So I think it's important to hold the line on the risk thresholds for the various regulations that have been on the books for many years. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. That concludes the testimony on item 28. Supervisor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions for Ms. Nakamura, if I could, on the presentation. And if we could bring back up the slide that showed the comparative of the multiple school or air quality districts, and indicated that South Coast was still one of the highest or the highest. And it is cute. The question I'm having as you're getting to that slide is, can you tell us is there any specific risk that causes us to have such a out of proportion risk analysis here? What can we do? What would be the focus to try and adjust that?
This risk is based on the ambient monitors, and they average the ambient monitors for key toxic air contaminants. It includes mobile sources and stationary sources. I think part of it is the urban and development and high industrialized pockets and areas that we have throughout our air basin. We have had substantial reductions in certain air toxics for certain industry categories, but we still have a fair amount of cars and non-diesel sources that are operating in our basin.
So it's not something specific we could look at any more than we're looking at all these issues combined all the time.
We do, because we look at the specific air toxics that are driving it. Sometimes, through our MATES program, we've identified, for example, the Riverside cement issue and hexavalent chrome. So, through this work, not only through CARB and our work, we're able to identify certain key sources if there's, pockets or localized issues. But this is, ambient data showing that overall throughout the air basin, we have an elevated health risk.
Basin-wide, okay. And then the second question, on the notifications, there was a lot of discussion of the notification program in the agenda item, but I never read what exactly is required, for instance, of a company applying. Is it limited to the number of residents within a certain distance? How many notifications? Could you describe that program for me a little bit?
Yeah, so Rule 212 is our permit notification rule. And under Rule 212, if an individual piece of equipment is over 1 in a million or facility-wide they're over 10 in a million, they have to provide public notification. So if they have a school, it's within, I think, 1,000 feet, that they are required to provide public notification to the school, and then the school is required to provide notification to the students, or we provide the notification to the students. And then I think it's a quarter mile from the particular source that they have to provide public notification.
And that's entirely at the cost of the applicant?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions or comments? The pleasure of the board on this item?
Move approval of staff's recommendation, Mr. Chair.
And I will second if we can also include the report back that was promised.
Yes, I accept that.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any opposition? Hearing none, that item is approved. Item 29.
Mr. Chairman, for items 29 and 30, the staff is recommending that the board simply carry these items over till the July board meeting.
We do that in a single motion, or we need separate motions?
Single motion. Would be
So
great.
moved.
Second.
Any opposition? Hearing none.
I believe there were, Mr. Chairman, cards to speak on 29 and 30.
We had 2 speaker slips, but goes over to July, right?
Yeah, I suppose so, Mr. Chairman, unless they want to comment on the movement of the item, on the continuance of the item.
Do either of you want to comment on the movement of the item? Okay. Then 31.
Good morning, Chairman Burke and members of the governing board. William Johnson, the Assistant Deputy Executive Officer for Administrative and Human Resources, here to present a ratified agreement with our professional bargaining group represented by the South Coast Professional Employees Association. It's under the same terms and conditions of the MOUs for the Teamster represented employees that you approved back in December, and we're here to seek your approval for this agreement today.
And this is consistent with the board's last best final offer.
May I get a motion?
I'll move the item.
Second.
Any opposition? Hearing none, this item is approved. Dr. Williams, comments? Will a comment?
Dr. Tom Williams, Sierra Club Transportation Committee, and also the Citizens Coalition for a Safe Community. What's the hot subject? 710, SR 710. But is it just SR 710? Has anyone ever heard of the long life pavement rehabilitation that spans between the I-710 and the SR 710? Is this a different segment? Actually, in 2011, Caltrans considered them segments of a single project. I hope that the review of the 710 corridor will include the issues of segmentation. That is, piecemealing one big project for with several little projects. And, oh, by the way, there's one project that's included. It's called the High Desert Corridor. 120 square miles of logistics center that may be part of a joint powers authority that's already established. So how do you feed 160 miles of freeway in the high desert, which is out of your jurisdiction, with the 710? It's segmentation. We're also concerned, well, last night we had a committee meeting, transportation, and we voted to oppose the freeway tunnel. Golly gee whiz, it's only been 30 years. Pavement, more pavement. Can't we get it on rail? So we're proposing a different approach, many little projects, which will maybe make your life a little bit more difficult because there might be several different ones. But it will satisfy the north-south mobility and reach efficiency and effectiveness for transportation in Northeast LA and the Western San Gabriel Valley. However, for air pollution, the central issue will be 180,000 vehicles, as put in the EIR, exhausting through 3 stacks times 5 miles of tunnels. The amount of ventilation, they say they'll scrub it and disperse it.
Well, dispersion to me is the solution to dilution is, the solution to pollution is dilution. So we hope that the comments of the AQMD will be substantive and basically tell them, send it back to the drawing board and start all over again like they did with the I-710. Bad EIRs don't rate public participation. Thank you.
Thank you. We recently have been informed of the passing of former CAR board member Joseph C. Calhoun of Seal Beach. And I'd like to take a moment to remark on his contribution to our clean air efforts. I had the privilege to serve alongside Joe while I was on the CAR board, and during a portion of more than the 10 years that he served as the automotive engineering member. Joe Calhoun was a chemistry graduate of Prairie View A&M University in Texas and earned a master's in chemical engineering from USC. He served as an Army officer in Korea, as a reserve officer with the Army Corps of Engineers, and as a liaison officer for the Military Academy at West Point. Joe's career path was interwoven with the very history of air quality management in this country. He began his professional engineering career in 1956 as an inspector with our parent agency, the LA County Pollution Control District. Remember, in 1956 was the early days in smog science. This was the year before the backyard trash incinerators were banned, and 5 years before the vehicle smog devices were installed. Joe then moved over to the State Department of Health and later to the Air Resources Board, where he helped supervise research, testing, and certification work in the engineering field of vehicle emission control systems. General Motors then hired him to help them direct their fast expanding auto emissions R&D activities in California. And next he moved to the GM Technical Center in Michigan, representing the OEM at the public hearings related to administration of vehicle inspection and maintenance, and collaboration on engineering in a new field called onboard diagnostics. One of GM's first accomplishments in this field was something they called a blinky code, which is now known as a check engine light. Joe retired from GM in 1994 to do consulting, and in 1995 was appointed by Governor Pete Wilson as the automotive engineering member of the CAR board, where he served for over a decade. Following his term, he served very recently on our own Clean Fuels Program Advisory Committee. Joe had a very personal, lifelong commitment to the public-private efforts on reducing vehicle emissions. He had a unique knowledge of what we called in-use emissions, and he helped us focus on critical components of the pollution problem. So to close, we remember Joe Calhoun as one of those rare individuals who didn't just wish for better days ahead. He worked hard for decades to make them all better days for each and every one of us. Much work remains, but the commitment of solid professionals like Joe C. Calhoun has enabled us to make amazing progress. With that, I invite a motion to adjourn today's meeting in his memory and in his honor.
So moved.
Second. This meeting is adjourned. You going to close session? We are going to close session?
Yeah, we have a closed session, Dr. Burke. It is necessary for the board to recess to closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9A and 54956.9D1 to confer with its counsel regarding pending litigation which has been initiated formally, in which the SCAQMD is a party. The actions are People of the State of California, XREL SCAQMD versus Exide Technologies, Inc., Los Angeles Superior Court, case number BC 533528, in the matter of SCAQMD versus Exide Technologies, SCAQMD Hearing Board, case number 3151-29, parens order for abatement, close parens. In re Exide Technologies, Inc., U.S. Bankruptcy Court for the District of Delaware, case number 13-11482, parens KJC, close parens, bankruptcy case, close parens. Friends of the Fire Rings versus SJQMD, San Diego Superior Court, North County, case number 37-201-4-00008860-CU-WN-NC. The meeting is being adjourned today in memory of Joseph C. Calhoun. A report of the reportable actions taken in closed session will be filed with the clerk of the board and made available to the public upon request. The meeting is adjourned.